Hi everyone, and welcome to Health Kick with Dr. K. I'm here with my co-host, Pastor C. We're going to be talking today about food allergies, and I'm just going to throw it right over to you and ask, are there any pressing questions that you have before we kind of jump into the topic?
For me, what's the difference between food allergy and sensitivity?
Okay, very good. So the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity. So we have different facets of our immune system called immunoglobulins, so IG for short. And the ones that are reactive when we have an allergic reaction, for example, people that are allergic to bees, for example, and they get, their throat closes up and they get that anaphylactic shock, that is an IgE response of the immune system.
Okay.
Same thing with hives, same thing, similar response when you touch like poison ivy and things like that. Whereas a food sensitivity is an IgG facet of the immune system. So it's a little bit more tricky in the fact of, IgE responses are pretty standard, hives, maybe shortness of breath, swelling of the mouth and face, depending on the type of allergy. Whereas IgG can be anywhere from immediate to days later.
Wow.
And it can show up as skin, it can show up as eczema or psoriasis, it can show up as headaches, it can show up as fatigue, mood changes, joint pain, or something that we would associate with food, which would be digestive upset, diarrhea, constipation.
Okay.
So a wide range of symptoms, right, for something that you would just think, oh, it's straightforward. If you eat something, oh, you're going to feel it, in your gut somewhere, right? But that is what makes food sensitivity so different.
Okay.
So when I'm talking to people about that in my practice, let's say they've done the food sensitivity testing, so we haven't done, there are ways to check what you're sensitive to without getting the blood work done, and I can talk about that. But if somebody's had the blood work done, then they would go through and eliminate the items that have shown up as flags for them, and then from there reintroduce the items and see sort of what responses they get.
Okay.
And I can tell you for sure that I've had people that have had extreme stomach pain for years, had all the scopes done, didn't know what it was from, and one person, it turned out to be apples.
Wow. Right?
So it's foods that you would think are nutritious and providing you lots of energy and all that good stuff,
healthy.
And yet, they're causing issues.
Yeah. Because most people think that food allergies more likely with the food that are processed, as you said, but it's healthy food also.
That's right. Yeah. So it is not necessarily processed foods. And I mean, yes, there are people that are sensitive to dyes or preservatives and things like that, but it's not always that. I can't even tell you when almonds became a superfood, and they still are, but when they became really popular as far as a protein source and healthy fat and things like that, there were so many people with that as a marker on their blood work, as being something that they're sensitive to. Tree nuts in general are generally kind of allergenic for people, but.
So can I ask a question? If you're allergic to nuts, does that mean you're allergic to every nuts or just some nuts?
So there are differences, not all the nuts are in the same family.
Okay.
For example, peanuts are actually a legume. Then you have the tree nuts, so you have almonds are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But cashews are part of a flower, I think, something like that. So they're actually in different families, so they produce different responses, and you may not respond the same to each one. Yeah. And unfortunately, food sensitivity testing gets a bad name because, you know, it's not as straightforward as, you know, when you go for, maybe if you've already been for allergy testing, they do that skin prick test on your forearm or on your back and, you know, see what happens type of thing. And if you get something that's itchy or swelling, then they're like, oh, yep, you're allergic to, you know, pollen or whatever. So the IgG for food sensitivity is a blood test, and what they do is they compare your blood and react it against all these different items. And based on the response, you're put on this kind of continuum. So you've got green, yellow, red. So green is no worries, you can have without any issues. Yellow is have with caution. So that might be, you know, once a week, that might be once a month. It depends on the person. And then you have red, which is really do try to avoid. Because what happens is, you know, you're eating all these inflammatory foods, and then, you know, we might eat something for X period of time, and then, you know, you add in poor sleep, you add in stressful events, you know, you add in like overdosing on it. And I think that those are things that kind of push your body over the edge. So instead of being able to handle maybe a little bit of inflammation here and there, you just can't, and because there's so many other factors that are influencing your life. So it's definitely something that I talk about a lot and I recommend a lot because it can be life-changing as far as, you know, comparing how somebody feels now to after they get the results back and start following. You know, we create a meal plan together, and there's so many alternatives now, like, you know, dairy alternatives, like wheat alternatives. There's so many now, so it's really it's not the same, obviously. You're not going to get like the croissant type effect from some, like, you know, gluten-free alternative, but there are some close, you know, seconds.
When you find out that you have an allergy to certain foods, say if you were young and you were allergic to almonds, just say that. Can that change over periods as you get older, or what happens?
So as far as straight up allergies go, like IgE response, yes, you can actually grow out of those. I would still say that I would be cautious with that too, though, because again, you may have a threshold that you just don't know what it is and what other factors might influence that threshold. Same thing with the food sensitivity stuff, right? Like, I've had people that have retested, you know, years later to see if they've had any difference in their red or yellow. And I've seen, you know, yellows that have become red, and I've seen, you know, yellows that have turned green, right? And I think that all depends on how the person has managed their meal plan over the course of time. Now, I'm sure people are curious, you know, how much is this blood test? Because ordering it through a naturopath, it is an out-of-pocket cost, and it is not a test that an MD would requisition. So they would only requisition things that are an IgE-related test. So it can range from $300 to $400. So it is something that you may need to budget for, but I do think that it is well worth the investment, because it's not a test really that I would recommend repeating, because, as I say, the changes are so minimal at the end of the day that it may not be worth it cost-wise for the person to retest. But the differences that I've seen in people's health as far as, you know, headaches, joint pain, you know, digestive concerns, like people that have had, they've been diagnosed with IBS, for example, which is kind of like one of those irritable bowel syndrome, which is a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that you go through millions of tests before they decide, oh, okay, we're going to call this IBS. And, you know, people with that diagnosis that have just been like, well, I guess I'm just going to be like this forever. Then they get the test done, and then they realize, oh, you know, I can actually feel good. I can, you know, not go through bouts of diarrhea and constipation all the time. And, you know, it really does make a big difference.
And because food allergy is real, why is it that most doctors don't really recommend it to patients?
Yeah, good question. So it gets debunked a lot as far as, you know, being a faulty test or something that's like really out there, or whichever. And I think it's because it's compared so much to IgE.
Okay.
And the immune responses are just so different.
Okay.
That's kind of what they know and that's what they study, and therefore the IgG just isn't in the scope. So we just have different ways of looking at things, and yeah, I mean that whole saying like you are what you eat is so true. Like I can't even emphasize that enough, because literally like when you break down food in your gut, each and every particle that you've eaten becomes a part of you. It's a building block for your cells of your body. So if you're fueling with something that, you know, might be actually hurting you in the long term, that's a problem, right? And that's going to be, and as I say with IgG, you don't know where it might show up as far as symptoms like that it can cause, whether it's, you know, really intense fatigue or, like I say, headaches, joint pain, etc. Yeah.
And I have noticed also with food sensitivity, sometimes you get that rash. You get like a little rash sometimes on your skin. You know, So it does have the physical symptoms, but it has also the outer appearance symptoms also.
Absolutely. Yeah. So people that, you know, have really chronic acne, eczema, psoriasis, those are all reasons to get this test done. And I can tell you for sure, for those three, you know, wheat and dairy, I can bet money that those are going to be on there, which is so sad for people because, you know, they love their cheese and, you know, they love bread, and I get that. I totally do. But it's just one of those things. And the other thing too is to factor in that, you know, wheat now is way different than, you know, what your parents and what your parents' parents would have had. You know, we always talk about gluten, and that too has been very popular over the last several years too, but the gluten content of wheat now is just like exponential. And that we don't know what the long-term consequences of messing around with our food like that is, right? I mean, I personally think that it produces way more food sensitivities because we're just not, you know, those changes have happened over the course of 50 years. But when you think about like genetic changes and our ability to like cope with different foods and environments and things like that, that takes generations to do. Right?
Yes, that's true.
So I think the changes that we've made in our food are just way too fast and way too intense for us to keep up with. You know, like maybe 100 years from now, we might be okay taking in, you know, preservatives and dyes and all this gluten, and because we've evolved to be that way, right? But I think right now as we are, it's really hard on people's system.
What age can you do this blood work to see if you have food sensitivity or you're allergic to food? What age should we be doing that?
Well, I personally don't see too many children in my practice. I have a few, but I just ordered some on a 2-year-old.
Wow.
And there's the option of doing like a finger prick, because everything is like minuscule, you know, samples. You don't need a lot of blood to get the same test done. So, you know, have a couple people with autism or autism spectrum disorders that I've ordered it for, or very intense like behavioral issues that are unexplained. Those are other reasons why I might requisition it for a child. Or if they have like lots of skin stuff or like asthma and things like that, that's another reason why I would suggest it. Yeah. And I've talked about the test a lot, but there are ways to go about this without doing the blood work, because as I say, you know, that cost for some is going to be pretty high, right? So other ways to go about this is if you literally Google elimination diet, it'll have a list of like foods that are highly allergenic, most commonly, you know, the ones that kind of hit people the most. And so it'll have like a yes and no column, and you can follow that. And I would say, you know, follow it for 3 weeks. And you know, the more strict you can be, the better. I get people that, you know, do the test and then they look at ingredients and are like, so can I get away with eating da, 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 da? And I'm like, so now I just tell people, I send them home with like their homework, and I'm like, if you have to email me, can I get away with? Don't email me. It's like, you know that you can't, right?
Yeah.
It's better just to be as strict as you possibly can, and then you'll get the best results,
Okay.
right? Because once you start reintroducing things, you'll really notice how you feel.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah.
the elimination, then reintroduce. Okay.
That's
a
right.
good idea.
That's
yeah.
right. So you can absolutely be your own guinea pig and do it.
Yes.
And it's the same idea. The only thing is that with the blood test, you know exactly what you need to avoid. With, you know, doing it on your own, you're kind of working on a bigger spectrum of items and then, you know, reintroducing it. So it does take, I've done both ways. And I think when I did it with just using the elimination diet, you know, protocol, I think it was about like almost 2 to 3 months before I had reintroduced everything that I could. Because you need to leave, because the reactions can happen days after.
Yes.
So you want to really make sure that you go back to eating, you know, the elimination diet for, you know, 3 to 5 days, depending on how you've responded to the previous item.
Yeah.
And then, you know, continue reintroducing from there. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What else? What else did I want to say about that? Yeah, so I mean, I've definitely had people that, as I say, the one that sticks out in my mind as far as the extreme stomach pain, and it turned out to be apples. I had another person that had, you know, hand swelling and joint pain.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, a lot of times we just like, if somebody's older adult, we're just like, oh, it's just arthritis.
Arthritis, yeah.
Or whichever. And yeah, it actually turned out that the joint pain and swelling completely went away until we put back rice, and then all of it came back again. So, as I say, it's one of those things where it's really nice to have that reintroduction phase to truly see for yourself. Because I mean, if you love a certain food, you want to be like convinced that you can't have it. And that's just a way to kind of convince you. Like if the negative side effects are worse than, you know, the joy that you get from eating rice, yeah, then it makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, too, a lot of times people suspect that they have a food sensitivity.
Yes.
But they're like, they don't want to fully immerse themselves into admitting it.
Yeah.
You know, I've had lots of people being like, yeah, I don't know, like I ate ice cream and, you know, had a couple times and I didn't feel the best, but, you know, it was delicious, so therefore, you know, it's all good, right? But it's definitely something to keep in mind, because these small things that you do over the course of, you know, your life when you're, you know, younger, middle age, and then advanced age, you just want to make sure that your health overall is it's at its best.
The optimum.
That's right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
best. Yeah. You know, when you talk about food allergies, I know I do have a few, but I don't want to know about it.
Okay,
I'm not willing to give up my ice cream. I'm not willing to give up the ice cream yet. I'm sorry. Not yet. Not yet.
Right, and that's the thing too, is that when it's staring back at you on the blood work, it's like, well, it's hard to deny it.
Yeah, and I think that's why I haven't really looked at it, but I do know that I have something going on with the ice cream. Yeah.
But same thing with that, right? Like there's so many alternatives. Like there's, you know, there's the cashew ice cream. There's banana-based ice creams. There's coconut-based ice creams. So there are lots of alternatives.
Yes.
I mean, it does take some getting used to, because depending on which brand you go with, the consistency might not be the same, for example. But the options are there.
Yeah.
The options are definitely there. What else did I want to say about this?
And with food sensitivity and the allergy to food, even with babies, sometimes that's one of the things that may contribute to babies being colicky. Yeah,
for sure.
Okay,
for
so
sure.
that's important for new moms to be aware.
Absolutely.
That if their babies are constantly crying. Yeah, and there's nothing physically that they can see is wrong with their child.
Yes.
Maybe this would be a time to take a look at their food, what they're eating. Because, you know, we think they're babies. It's only milk, right?
Yes.
Breastfeeding milk or, you know, the tin feed, you know, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the immunoglobulins, so the IGs that I was talking about, they do pass through breast milk, right? So I know for sure A and M do.
Yeah.
Lacking research on the like G aspect of that, but I mean, I would argue if A and M are going through, like,
why not?
Why not the other ones, right? Because there's a ton of, you know, idiopathic, aka unexplained colic in babies.
Yes.
Now I would say there are some other reasons, like maybe it's vitamin D, maybe it's probiotic, not sure, but something that you can at least try at home is altering your own diet if you are doing the breastfeeding and see how your little person does. Yeah, definitely. That is a good point too. The other piece on that too is that I often tie things back to, you know, long-term health and brain health and all that type of thing. So there's a lot of argument back and forth of, you know, what crosses the blood-brain barrier. So basically you have your brain, and then you have these little, you know, coverings on your brain to protect it, and, you know, blood flow is supposed to go to your brain, and then it's filtered through these things so that you're not having a whole ton of things get to your brain that shouldn't be there, essentially. So there's a lot of research back and forth of, you know, what gets through, what doesn't get through, right? But the more we keep studying the gut and its influence on, you know, not only your brain influencing your gut, but your gut also influencing your brain, is that I think we've realized, we don't 100% know, because there's also some papers out there about wheat, so bread, and mental health.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So there are some arguments about how, you know, at the end of it, it breaks down and influences the brain in ways that opioids might influence the brain. So opioids are depressants on the system, so like make you slower. You know, sometimes they might help with pain, but they might also depress the mood.
The mood,
Right?
Depress your energy.
That's right. Make you very tired, sluggish, you know, that type of thing. So there are, that's right, that's right. So there are studies out there about that. And even the fact of there being studies out there about that is a little bit scary, because then you're like, okay, what else might influence your brain and things like that. And I've definitely had people like with bread feel extreme fatigue after, like to the point where like when they've introduced it back, like they had to take a nap. Right. The other one, I've had a couple people say that eggs made them very angry. Like they ate eggs and they just became angry, like irritable. So that to me was kind of funny, because they were telling me about how they like took it out on their family. But you just, those are things you wouldn't necessarily think of, right? Of just having that kind of immediate response and reaction.
Well, I know with bread, right? So especially you eat pies, or you know, you kind of, and you know, you feel tired, you kind of sleep, you feel warm, right? It's comfort food, right? Especially apple pie warmed up, it's comfort food. But not realizing that it does affect the brain if that's one of your food sensitivity, right? And it affects you to the point that you're tired, you know, which a lot of us are complaining now that we're kind of tired, right?
Absolutely.
So that's something to look into. If it's not a physical issue, is to look into our foods to see what is contributing to tiredness. Yes,
you got it. You got it. So that in a nutshell is food sensitivity versus food allergy. So if you guys have any questions about testing, or you know, any elimination diet things that you can do on your own at home, absolutely feel free to use any of the contact information that's on evomm3.com or on my Instagram as well. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. Next month we're going to be talking about macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats. Hope to see you then.
Okay.